Hi, my name's Marie. I teach law, and I was recently marking 300 first year law assignments, and so I thought I'd put out this public service announcement of 5 things you really should check before you hit submit on your law assignment. The first thing is spelling. Oh my gosh. All right, so you want to make sure that you're using the appropriate spelling for your jurisdiction. So in Australia, that would be Australian English. So what we don't want is to see American spelling, like this example here. We also want to check key legal terms to make sure that they're spelt correctly as well. So for example, in Australia, judgment, when we're talking about the decision in a case, doesn't have an E. So we want to double check that. And that mistake was probably made by every second student in my cohort of 300. Another thing you would want to check, just a basic proofread. So here the word delivered is spelled incorrectly. Oh, and look, we also have that fabulous little spelling of judgment. All right, so that is one thing that you should definitely double check your spelling. Now, looking to our next hot tip, double check your capital letters as well. And one of the examples on the last page actually had this too. You want to make sure that your courts are given a capital letter. So for us, with this particular assignment, we were dealing with a High Court decision, so capital H, capital C. We were also dealing with the Federal Court, so you can capitalize Federal Court as well. Okay. We also have an act here, a piece of legislation, and look, once again, we have no capital letters for the Native Title Act. So definitely check those ones. Oh, look, hang on, here we go again. There's another High Court too. In terms of the next example here, what have we got? Oh, yes, there it is again. High Court. Okay. And then in terms of the example down the bottom here, this was actually a subheading that helps structure the student's paper. We also want a capital letter for the first part of our subheading, and you don't need capital letters necessarily for the rest of your heading, but you want to make sure that that first word is capitalized. Okay, remember your capital letters. Okay, next hot tip, check for formatting issues. Yes, definitely do that. So here we had different fonts. And it also looks like we might have different sizes as well, potentially, but double check that your fonts are uniform and the size of your fonts, the size of your words are also uniform. Here as well, this is a formal assignment, so you shouldn't have dot points unless you've been specifically instructed to do so. Not technically a formatting issue, but don't do it unless you've been told to do it. And then down the bottom here, here's an example of someone's footnote section, and they have some weird spacing going on. So double check that too. So down the bottom in your footnotes, you should have a single spacing and no big gaps like what we have here. All right, so check your formatting. Next hot tip, look for obvious referencing errors. With this particular assignment, there are a lot of students who were referring to legislation, such as this example here, and the legislation title wasn't italicized, and that's a really obvious one to the marker. Same with your case names, they need to be italicized as well under our referencing system, the AGLC. As well, another one that jumps out to me as a marker is when the punctuation is put after the footnote, not before the footnote. And that's something that's quite a typical mistake when it comes to first year law students. So just remember that, punctuation first, then your little footnote number. And here's another error there around the use of IBID. So with IBID, the student appears to be using it correctly, maybe, given that they're actually citing a different edition. So that does make me wonder whether this is the correct citation or not. But assuming that it is, IBID then would be not italicized. And there's something a bit weird going on with the back part of the references here. Because if it's an IBID reference, you wouldn't have a subsequent references kind of rule formatting as well. So maybe one or the other is incorrect. So I would double check those two if I was this student before handing in. Okay, all right. And then the final thing that I think is really important that you check before you hand in is those assignment instructions. Just go look at them one last time. Um, Quite a few of my students weren't directly answering the question. If you've been asked to summarize the facts and you've been asked what the questions were on appeal and what the litigation history was, you need to go to your response and make sure you actually do those things clearly and succinctly. And then in terms of the next little tip here, double check what version of the case you should be working with. Typically in law, there could be multiple reported versions or unreported versions of the case. Double check whether the assignment instructions tells you what to work with. And if they do tell you, make sure you only use that version. So I had students using the HCA, so the High Court of Australia transcript, as opposed to the reported version of the case, which they'd been specifically instructed to use. And if there isn't a specific instruction, you should just be working with the most authoritative version. In terms of my final tip, double check if you need a bibliography. I think like 1 in 4 students didn't have one, and I'd specifically told them to include one. So HD papers are HD papers because they follow the instructions as well as have quality responses. All right, that's enough for me, but there's 5 things that you should check before you submit your law assignment.